We've looked at some foundation models for reflective practice. Now we need to look at some critical models. Again, we'll be reviewing these briefly and looking at them in more detail in a later lecture. Perhaps the most significant critical model is Stephen Brookfield's critical lenses. He said that teachers look through different glasses, different eyeglasses, in order to reflect. And he identified these 4 different lenses as our own view, our own autobiography. He also said that we can look at what happens in the classroom from the student's point of view and also from our colleagues' point of view. And we can also look at what happens in our teaching from a theoretical standpoint. And he very conveniently labelled these as the self lens, our own viewpoint, the student lens, the viewpoint from the students, the peers lens, in other words, the viewpoint of our colleagues, and the theory lens, which is why it's called the 4-lens approach. Despite the fact that teachers' professional experience can often be considered as a little bit invaluable from a theoretical point of view, Stephen Brookfield makes a significant point in saying that the experience of the teachers, the autobiography of the teachers, is really the foundation point and the most important aspect of being a teacher. He says that as teachers we must consider this to be more important sometimes than the actual theories. And he goes on to say that these 4 lenses are very important because the most important thing that the teacher can do in terms of teaching is trying to get inside the students' heads. What are they thinking about learning? What are they thinking about being in the classroom? Trying to understand how they're learning. And therefore, he made a number of significant points in terms of these 4 lenses. One point is that he says that reflective practice and teaching actually becomes about identifying power and how power can support and also hinder the educational process. He also goes on to say that what the teacher needs to do, therefore, is to challenge certain assumptions in order to address that power imbalance that may be in the classroom. And in this light, he came up with a number of very useful frameworks for the reflective practitioner. One is the critical incident questionnaire. It's a series of questions that the teacher can ask themselves in order to reflect on the teaching in the classroom. And he also came up with the critical practice audit, the CPA. And perhaps most significantly, he also identified how the critical incident questionnaire can be used as a framework for a teacher's journal writing if they're keeping a reflective journal. So the critical incident questionnaire has a number of significant questions. For example, at what moment in class did you feel most engaged with what was actually happening? This is a significant question for the teacher to consider. At what moment in class were you most distanced, most removed from what was happening? What action that anyone took, whether it was the teacher or the student, was most helpful or most productive? And what was most puzzling or problematizing? And also, what surprised you most as a teacher in terms of what you did in the classroom? What were you not expecting? So the critical practice audit takes a number of critical incidences, say 2 or 3 in a week, and uses the questionnaire to reflect on those incidences. The idea is that as a teacher you write a brief description about what happened in a particular incident, and use those questions to reflect on the incident in detail. Part of the audit is also to reflect on your own assumptions as a teacher about what happened, to think about what were the interactions that generated a particular incident, and how you as a teacher challenged what was happening both with yourself and with the students. Part of the critical practice audit is also to think about the information, the evidence that you've got as a teacher, and to check its accuracy. Are you really seeing what really happened, or are you looking through your own lens, the self lens, the autobiographical lens, which is perhaps skewing the reality? What different perspectives, therefore, can you look at? And this is where the other lenses become important, the student lens and the colleagues' lens, the peers' lens. And also, we mustn't neglect the theoretical, the theory lens that the teacher can use to get a different perspective on things. And so, therefore, what we see through these four lenses is a very critical approach, self-critical by the teacher and critical of the processes which are taking place, looking not only within but also without the school.